Hello everyone. In CIS-115, we're continuing on in week 9 of the class, finishing up module 4. This lecture is going to talk about a couple different things. First, we'll talk about while loops. We've already looked at for loops in the previous week before spring break. So we'll look at a different kind of a loop called a while loop. We'll also look at how we could use that while loop to do input testing. And lastly, we'll work with this file pointer to see another way aside from just using a scanner to process a file. So let's click into the while loop material in the textbook. So this is the structure of a while loop to do essentially what we could do with a for loop with a lot less code. So I'm going to take this code right here, copy it to my clipboard, and pop into Tawny and paste that in. Now, Python is very sensitive to indentation, so if you noticed when I pasted it from the textbook, I got some extra indentation here. We're going to need to fix that before we can use this correct without Python giving us an error message. So what this code is going to do is it's going to start at 0. It's going to run up to 9, and it's going to print. It's going to print the number that we're on each time through the loop, our loop counter. And since they use the comma and the end equals with an empty string, it should put all those numbers on the same line. So let's run this. And you see what it did, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now this end equals stuff is talked about in the very first module of our class. There was a lecture on the print statement. And there's also a sep equals as well as an end equals. If you want to override how Python does something with the comma, that we could use the sep to do that. If you want to override what it puts on the end of the line after it prints something, you can use the end equals. Now, you saw what this did with the end equals nothing, basically. Let's take that out and run this again, and you'll see what happens. See how it went to a new line after it printed each item? So that was our while loop, and we could, I'm going to comment it all out, and there's a multi-line comment if we do this, also known as a document string. So 3 quotes or 3 double quotes. So now this was our while loop. I'm going to write a for loop to do exactly the same thing. Okay, so here's what we had when we did the for loop. The while loop. Okay, now let's I'll clear this and run it again, and you can see it does exactly the same thing. So this is a for loop. This is doing the same thing with a while loop. Now, you notice that most of the time when we're using a while loop, we have to do something before we ever get into the while loop. Okay? So we have to do something outside of the while loop And then we have to make sure that whatever condition we're testing right here, that it has a chance to change. For instance, if I left this line off that says I equals I plus 1, this loop would go on forever. It would never stop. So you've got to make sure that you have an opportunity in your while loop for that condition. This is our condition right here. For this condition to somehow change. Otherwise, you're just going to go on forever. Where a for loop does have a definite start and a definite end. Okay? So why use one over the other? Well, a for loop is used when we know in advance how many times something needs to happen. Somebody that picks up your code and looks at it, if they see you using a for loop, the implication there is that this is going to happen a certain number of times and stop. Contrast that with a while loop. The idea with a while loop, we really don't know in advance how many times a while loop may run, so there's not a definite end to it. You'll see while loops used a lot for input testing, and there's actually some code in Code Lab, some items in Code Lab that require you to do some input testing. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the checklist, and you notice the last thing on the checklist says to help with the Code Lab input testing questions, carefully read this material that I put together out there in the course website. And I know we've been on break for a couple weeks, so just to be clear, this is the course website for our class, www.rccc.com/CIS115/ if you're using Chrome. So almost all of our lectures are out there. Here's the input testing examples that I have linked. All I did is linked to that material in Blackboard. Okay, so right here, this says letter testing. It says we want to get a letter from the person running the program and write a loop that is going to keep asking for a letter until that person keys in an A to make it stop. So I can take this code right here, copy it, go back to Tani and paste that code in, and well, let me clear out everything so that I don't get stuff. Okay, so like I told you earlier, when we have a while loop, you have to do something outside of the loop. We're getting a letter outside of the loop. Notice here's our condition, letter is not equal to A, and what's inside the loop? Exactly the same thing we had before we got into the loop. So you have to get something once outside and then get it again inside the loop. Okay, so we said that when we run this program, it's going to keep asking us to key in a letter, and it will print it as long as we don't type in an A. So let's run it. Enter a letter, Z. Excuse me, Z. It says you entered Z. Okay, I'll enter W. You see it says I entered W. We are inside that loop, and it's just going to keep running until I type an A, and once I typed an A in there, you notice it stopped. So this is a while loop for input testing. Okay? There are several code lab items that ask you to write something similar to this. Now, here's one. The following while loop will continue to loop until the person running the program types a number between 5 and 9. So again, if we take this code here and paste it into Tawny, here's Tawny, okay, you'll see that same pattern that we talked about earlier. Outside of the while loop, we have this input. The input is wrapped inside the int function, so whatever's typed in here is going to get converted into an int and then stored in this variable number. Now here's our condition. While number is less than 5 or number is greater than 9, it's going to stay in that loop. Okay? If we enter something that is a 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, it will stop because that's the condition that we gave it here. And you'll notice, again, we have this outside of the loop. We have the same thing again inside the loop. How do we know this stuff here is inside the loop? It's indented. Everything that's part of a loop is indented in Python. Okay? So let's try that. Enter a number between 5 and 9 to stop. Let's just enter in a 2. You see it says enter a number between 5 and 9 again. If I enter a 4, it's still looping. When I enter a 5 in there, it stops. Okay? So we could write this condition another way. Okay? Can you think of a way to write it with an and? Well, let's see if we could rewrite this. I'll comment it out. And let's see if we can rewrite it to use an and. While number is greater than or equal to 5 and number is less than or equal to 9. Okay? So we rewrote this one that used an or with an and. Okay? So as long as number is okay, we've got to change this to negate that condition. So I'm going to put this right here. Okay. And put a not in front of it. Okay, negate it. Let's see if that'll work now. It doesn't like that, so let's try this. Okay, so we've rewritten this that was using while numbers less than 5 or greater than 9 to be while not number. Okay, so let's try it now. It should ask us for another number if we type a 4. Okay, and it did. If I type a 10, it asks us for another number. If I type a 5, it should stop, and it does. So this way is what I would prefer folks to use, simply because we're testing the positive, the true part. Here we had to test the, if you use an and with that, then we had to do while it's not in that range. So I would accept either one, but most of the time this is easier to understand where you don't have a not in there. Okay, so that's range testing. Okay, so lastly, let's use a file pointer instead of a scanner Now that we've talked about while loops, and remember, we always have to do something outside of the while and again inside the while. So let's see if we can go up here on the checklist and look at this material on the file pointers right here. Now you notice it says that we could open a file with a file pointer and we could read all the lines in the file. So right here, when I clicked on that link, this is the material in the textbook. Here we're creating a variable that's called FP, short for file pointer. Okay, so here I am in Tawny, and I'll just let me clear that out again and paste that in and get rid of the indentation. Okay, so where I've got this program saved, this testing file pointers.py, I have a data.txt file. If you open that up, you can see it has these things in it: true 3, minus 4.4, hello there, and ACK. Okay, so data.txt has those things in it. Okay, just a text file. So let's see if we can read that data.txt. Notice it has that txt extension on it, so I had to add that. Okay, now next, if you look at the material in the textbook right here, it says that if we want to read the entire file into one single string, we can do it with this method right here. So if I go back to Tawny and paste that in, okay, I've got fp.read, and everything's going to go into this variable that we just created as text. Now the last thing that we need to always remember to do, fp.close. That's going to close this file pointer that we have open. Bad things can happen, just like if you're using a scanner. Same issues with a file pointer. If you forget to close this file, you could corrupt your flash drive. You could corrupt the hard drive in your computer. So you've got to be careful. And remember, if you open a file pointer, you want to make sure you close it. Okay, so if I wanted to see what was in that, text, I could actually print it right here after we've closed everything. So you remember when we were looking at that file and we saw all that stuff in it? Well, here that stuff is again. We just printed it all out right here after we read it all into there. Okay, so this reads the entire file into one big string called text. Okay, now because it jumped down here, this should tell you that that text file has a new line character on the end of each of these because it separated them when we printed it. We could see that if we do change this, instead of saying fp.read, if we do a read lines, this method of a file pointer object will actually read that entire text file into a Python list object. So instead of just being a text, it will be a list. Okay, so if I print a list out, I changed the name of my variable so that it made sense, you will see what happens here. See the square brackets on the ends? That tells us that that's a Python list. The commas separate each item in the list. So this is one item in the list. This is another item in the list, and this is the last item in the list. You notice that each of these things has a \n on it. That's why when we printed it, we saw it go down to a new the next line. So that's a new line character. Okay? So if I wanted to get to hello there, when we have a list, a Python list like this, the first element in the list is 0. It starts counting at 0. The second element is 1, and the last element is 3. So let's try that out. If we wanted to get to hello there from our list, if I do this, a list 1, remember I said it starts counting at 0? So this is 0. This is a list 1. So let's try it. Do you see what printed? Hello there. If I wanted to get to the ACK, the very last thing, I'd put a 2, and now you see I got ACK. Okay? If I wanted to get the very first item in the list that had a bunch of things there, if I do a list 0, it had I think 3 items on that line. See, it had true, it had 3, and it had minus 4.4. So that's the way that you can work with the file pointers to get to stuff in a file. Lastly, let's just go ahead and look at how we could process this file with a read line instead of read lines. Okay, so if you go to the checklist, not the checklist, but the site for the class right here at rcccit.com/CIS115, right here under while loops is our text file processing reference. And you can see what we were doing here with the open for read. If you don't say otherwise, it just assumes that it's read. Okay? And so let's, here's the read line right here. Okay? Reads and returns the next line from the file. So if we wanted to process that presidents.txt file, or we could process the file that we were just looking at. Okay, you notice they're calling it, instead of FP, they're using file pointer and all that. Right here, I'm just going to take this code and copy it and paste it into our Tawny program so you can see what it would look like. Okay, so let me make sure that I've got this indented correctly for Python. I'm backspacing this out and hitting a tab. Okay, where it says file pointer, I need to change that to FP. And remember, we said when we have a while loop, we need to do something outside of the loop and then the same thing again inside the loop. So here we go. I have a line equals fp.readline. Okay. Here I've got a line equals fp.readline again. And here I'm printing it. So I'm going to take this end equals off so that you can see what happens if I take that out. So let's run this now. Okay, and it says a list is not defined. That's because I have this code down here that was left over. Okay, now we want to make sure that we do this. Remember, we opened it up here. We want to make sure we close it. So let's try that again now. Okay, you notice how I'm getting a space in between each of these? The read line is actually reading that new line character that we saw in the file. So, and it's printing it out. So that's why when they had the print here, they did this. So that we don't get a double space between there. Because each time we read this, it's already getting the new line character. So let's clear this and run it one more time. You see what I have now? Okay, so that's how you can use a file pointer a lot of different ways. We did the read, we did the read, we did the read lines, and then lastly we used a while loop with a read line to process that stuff. So good luck with the homework questions. We can pop into those and look, but I think we've pretty well covered everything with while loops. We've also covered everything with text file processing that you might happen to run into in the homework questions. I don't actually think when I went into them that it gave me a question about any of the file pointer things. But I'll pop in there again and just see if we scroll through and see anything that might have anything to do with a file pointer. So popping into here, okay. So we've done some of these already in previous lectures. There's a scanner question. There's another scanner question. There's a sum question, a accumulator pattern question. Some more file pointer. Excuse me, not file pointer. That's a scanner question. Another scanner question. Scanner. A counter question. No, that's got total in it. That's a accumulator pattern question. This is still using a scanner object. There's a separate scanner lecture out there. I don't think it gave me a file pointer question at all. Yep, it did give me one right here. Was missing that earlier. So it says the task is to read and print tokens from a file. And this is what we have. Do we have any criticisms of that code? So first token is data 0, second token is data 0, third token is data 0. So right here, data equals fp.readlines. So do you remember what we said the readlines does? Readlines gives us a list object of every line in the file. The first line is data going to be data 0. Second line is data 1. Third line is data 2. So this, the way they have it written here with this print, it's going to print the same thing over and over and over. We would never get to another token. But let's just try that code in Tawny against a file that we already have so you can see it. So we had a data.txt file out there, so and it had this stuff here in it. So I'm going to paste that question from the homework in here. And you notice it's closing it. Always check to make sure it's closing it. It's going to ask us for the name of the file. So we're going to have to type in data.txt if we want to use this file. So clear it, run it. It says name of file, data.txt. Remember, I have that data.txt file downloaded to exactly the same spot where my Python program is. Right here, you see data.txt, and here's the program that we're playing with right now, testing file pointers. So I've typed data.txt in there, I hit enter, and you see what it says? The first token is true, 3, and so on. So this is printing the same thing over and over like we said it would. What criticism do we have? Well, the code's definitely not correct. Literal string must be given to the open function? No, it'll take that. The file pointer's closed at the wrong time? No. The only criticism that works is the first token is read and printed 3 times. Okay? So that is how we solve that. I think that's probably the only question that it's going to have given me on that. Now, if I wanted to roll through that file, actually try to fix this program, I have some issues with trying to fix this simply because in our file we had multiple things on each line, okay? But if we wanted to see each line in the file, we could do this, couldn't we? Because remember it had 3 lines in data.txt, so I changed this to data 0, data 1, data 2. If I run it again now, you'll see that we data.txt, you see that I am getting different things each time, but I'd still have a little bit of issue with getting to all the tokens. Do you remember the read that got us everything into one big string? So I could do this. Read, that's going to give me everything in the file in one big string. Okay? Now, there's a little trick to this. If we wanted to split it up into a list, we could do this. Now I'm doing read everything and then split it. And if I do that, I think this will let me get to the individual items in that data. So we've just reworked their program from the homework to make it actually do the right thing. Data.txt. Okay, you see what I'm getting now? First token's true, second token's 3, third token is minus 4.4. So this is the way that we could actually split everything up into that file. It splits it on the white space characters. So we basically wrote our own scanner here, didn't we? All right, that's the end of this lecture. I'll put one more lecture out there that talks about these command line questions that you may see on the homework and on the exams. Good luck. Stay healthy.